You stand at the edge of the well of Erd, and the black water shows you a monster. Not your face, but a wolf. Its maw is a chasm, swallowing the sun whole, plunging the 9 worlds into an eternal silent night. This is the story of the god who saw his own doom and decided to fight it. To understand that final vision, you must go back to the beginning, to the day the Allfather first asked the Norns how he would die. Odin went to the well of Erd for one reason. He wanted to know how he would die. The well lay at the base of Yggdrasil, the world tree, where its 3 great roots drank from 3 different springs. This was the root in Asgard. The water should have been clear, but as the Allfather approached, he saw it was not. It was dark, still, a black mirror reflecting nothing. 3 figures sat beside it, the Norns, not goddesses but something older. They were Erd, Verdandi, and Skuld, what was, what is, and what shall be. They did not spin fate, they carved it into the trunk of the tree itself, and the sap that wept from the carvings dripped into the well, staining the water. They were whispering as Odin approached, a sound like roots cracking stone. They did not stop when they saw him. They knew he was coming. They knew everything. He asked his question. The Norns fell silent. Then Skuld, the youngest, whose name means future, pointed a bone-white finger at the water. "Look." Odin looked. The black water did not show his reflection. It showed a wolf. A wolf so vast its open jaws stretched from horizon to horizon, and it was swallowing the sun. The sky went black. The image shifted. He saw the sea boiling, and a serpent, Jormungandr, rising from the depths, its venom spraying across the waves, poisoning the very ocean. He saw a ship made of dead men's fingernails, carrying an army of giants, sailing from the east. He saw fire giants riding from the south, their leader, Surt, holding a sword that burned brighter than the sun. And he saw himself. He saw a grey wolf, Fenrir, pinning him to the blood-soaked mud of a field called Vigrid. He saw the wolf's jaws close. The vision did not show the gore, it showed the consequence. The Allfather, the ruler of Asgard, was gone. The Norns spoke names one after another in a flat, unending chant. Thor would fall to the serpent's venom, but not before walking 9 steps away from the beast. Heimdall and Loki would kill each other. Tyr and the Hound Garm, Freyr and Surt, name after name, a ledger of divine death. They gave him the date. They gave him the signs, 3 winters with no summer between. The breaking of all bonds, the stars vanishing. They gave him the certainty. There was no if, only when. Odin stood. The knowledge was inside him now, a cold stone in his gut. That feeling when you know something terrible is coming, a diagnosis, a deadline, and you can't stop it. The Norse called that feeling word. It meant more than fate. It meant the inescapable pattern of things woven so deep into the world that even the gods were just threads in its tapestry. He returned to Asgard as the sun was setting. He did not go to his hall, he went to Valhalla. The feast was already underway. The sound of it hit him first, a roar of laughter, the clatter of drinking horns, the song of 1,000 Einherjar warriors celebrating the day they died. Odin pushed the great doors open. The sound stopped. Silence in Valhalla was a physical thing. The warriors froze, horns halfway to their lips. The Valkyries, who served the mead, stood still. They saw his face. They saw his one eye, which had seen everything, now holding a knowledge that had hollowed him out. He walked to the high seat. He did not sit. He looked at them, the chosen dead, the heroes brought here to train for a single final battle. They believed they were preparing for glory. He had to tell them the truth. "The Norns have spoken," he said. His voice did not echo. It was absorbed by the silence. "Ragnarok is not a test. It is an end. We know the day. We know the enemy. We know the cost." He named it Fenrir, Jormungandr, Surt with his flaming sword, he told them who would fall himself first, then Thor, Tyr, Heimdall. A list of names that were the pillars of their world. A man in the third row, a Saxon king with an old axe scar on his cheek, stood. "Then why fight?" he asked. Not in defiance, in genuine confusion. If we are to lose, why prepare? Odin looked at him. He looked at all of them. This was the question. This was the moment the prophecy became real. Not in the water of a well, but in the hearts of those who had to live with it. "How do men prepare for a storm they know will break their walls?" Odin said. "They board the windows, they store the grain, they move their families to high ground. They do it knowing the wave may still take everything. They do it because the preparation is the answer. It is the only answer." He picked up his own drinking horn, but did not drink. We cannot change the pattern, but we can meet it with our spears sharp, our shields locked, and our names remembered. We will make the wolf work for his meal. We will make the serpent choke on his venom. We will make the fire giants burn themselves to ash, taking us. He raised the horn. "We fight not to win," he said, the words settling over the hall like a vow. "We fight to make the ending cost the universe so dearly that what grows after will know our names." The feast did not resume that night. The mead sat untouched. The warriors filed out to the training grounds under a starless sky. They began to drill in the dark. This was the new work, the only work, preparing for an end with a ferocity that would echo into whatever came next. Thor's forge was not in Asgard. It was in a cavern beneath the roots of a mountain, where the earth's heat rose to meet his hammer. At dawn, the only light came from the coals and the molten metal. He worked alone. Sweat cut rivers through the soot on his arms. He was not making a new weapon. He was reforging the old one, Mjolnir, the crusher of giants, for the 100th time. He knew the prophecy. He knew the serpent, Jormungandr, would rise from the sea. He knew their final duel would shake the foundations of the world. And he knew with a certainty that felt like a cold stone in his gut that his hammer would shatter against the monster's skull. Yet he worked. The hammer's head glowed white-hot on the anvil. His hands, burned and scarred over centuries, moved with a precision that was its own kind of prayer. This was the work now. Not hope, but preparation. It was the practice of a doomed art. Like a man rehearsing a speech he must one day deliver before a hostile crowd, knowing his words will fail but polishing them anyway. Thor examined the runes along the haft: strength, storm, unyielding. They were just words. The world serpent's scales were thicker than castle walls, its venom a poison that could kill a god. He lifted the hammer. He brought it down. The strike was not an act of creation, but of defiance. The clang echoed through the cavern, a sharp, lonely sound. He struck again and again. Each impact was a promise. "I will make you work for it." Each was a countdown. The rhythm became the heartbeat of a doomed pantheon, a metallic pulse measuring out the last days. He did not look up when a shadow fell across the forge entrance. Loki stood there, leaning against the stone, his expression unreadable. "Does it help?" Loki asked, his voice quiet over the ringing anvil. Thor did not pause. "The hammer will break," he said, his eyes on the glowing metal. "My hands will not." He knew Loki's fate too, bound in his son's entrails, dripping venom onto his face until the end of the world's end. "Why are you here, brother?" Thor asked, the title a bitter formality. Loki's smile was a thin, sharp thing. "They've caught him, the pup. They want him bound." Thor's hammer went still. The coals hissed. He knew which son Loki meant. They took the wolf to an island in the middle of a lake, a place called Lyngvi. It was not a battlefield, it was a trap. Twilight painted the water the color of old iron, and the air was so cold the breath of gods and beast alike hung in clouds. Fenrir was no longer a pup. He stood taller than a war horse, his fur the gray of winter stone, his eyes 2 chips of yellow ice. He was suspicion given flesh. The gods approached him with a chain called lading. "Test your strength," they said, their voices too bright. "Prove you are the strongest of us all." Fenrir looked at the heavy iron links, then at their faces. He let them bind him. With one shuddering flex, the chain exploded into shards that hissed as they hit the lake. They brought a second chain, dromy, twice as thick, forged in a deeper fire. The same request, the same false smiles. Fenrir considered the silent ring of gods, Odin's one eye watching, Thor's knuckles white on his hammer, Tyr standing grim and still. The wolf allowed the binding. He strained, his muscles coiling like mountain roots, and Dromi shattered into dust. A silence followed, deeper than the lake. It was the silence of a plan failing. The gods now knew two truths. Fenrir's strength was growing beyond any earthly metal, and he would not be tricked a third time. So they commissioned a fetter from a place beyond strength. They asked the dwarves for a binding made of impossible things, not metal but metaphor, the sound of a cat's footfall, the beard of a woman, the roots of a mountain, the sinews of a bear, the breath of a fish, the spittle of a bird. They took 6 impossibilities and wove them into a ribbon, smooth and soft as silk, and they named it Gleipnir. They brought it to the island. Fenrir sniffed the slender band. It had no weight, no smell of the forge. "This will not hold me," he growled, the sound vibrating in the chests of the gods. "But I see no honor in it. If you bind me with this trickery, how do I know you will free me?" The gods shifted. No one spoke. Fenrir's yellow eyes fixed on them. "One of you, place your hand in my mouth as a pledge of good faith. Then I will submit." It was an impossible ask, a god's hand in the jaws of a beast whose destiny was to devour the sun. The silence stretched. Then Tyr, the god of law and oaths, the one who understood the weight of a promise more than any other, stepped forward. He did not look at Odin. He did not hesitate. He stepped forward and offered himself as guarantee, his hand for the wolf's trust. The other gods moved quickly then, looping Gleipnir around the wolf's legs. The more Fenrir struggled, the tighter the impossible ribbon became. He roared, thrashing, but the silken band held fast. Realizing the betrayal was total, his jaws snapped shut. Tyr did not scream. When Fenrir realized the deception, Tyr paid the price. He did not scream. He looked at the bound wolf, then at the faces of his kin. His expression was not pain but recognition. This was not an accident. It was a transaction. The first payment on a debt that would come due at Ragnarok, sealed not with a handshake, but with a sacrifice. The gods erupted in nervous relief. All but Tyr. They looped a chain from Gleipnir to a boulder, and drove the boulder deep into the earth. They bound the wolf to a boulder driven deep into the earth. The wolf's howl of rage and betrayal became a river of drool that flooded the valley, a river they named Van. They left him there, bound by a lie, waiting, and Tyr walked away in silence, understanding the true cost of the deception. It was a moment that echoes through any conflict. The gods did not kill Loki for Baldur's death. Death would have been a mercy and an escape. They wanted him present for the end he had set in motion. They carried him to a cave, its walls weeping with cold moisture, and bound him with the entrails of his own son, Narfi, a binding of kin and guilt no magic could break. They turned his son Vali into a wolf, maddened, who then tore Narfi apart. The gods used what remained. There is no cruelty deeper than turning a family against itself. Above Loki's head, they fastened a serpent to a stalactite. Its venom dripped, one slow, burning drop at a time, aimed at his unprotected face. This was the geometry of his punishment, bound by his son's guts, poisoned by the world's venom, forever. But Sigyn, his wife, stayed. When all the 9 worlds cursed his name, she took up a bronze bowl and stood beside him. Her role was simple, impossible: catch every drop. She was the dam against the tide of divine vengeance, her arms trembling with the strain, the acidic smell of venom filling the small dark space. It is the most terrible form of waiting imaginable, the kind you know in a traffic jam, watching the clock tick toward an appointment you cannot miss, powerless to move. For Sigyn, the appointment was the moment her arms failed. And they always did. When the bowl filled, she had to turn away to empty it. In that moment, the venom fell. It struck Loki's skin not like water, but like molten iron. The pain was so profound it shook the mountain itself. The earth quivered. Men in Midgard far below felt the ground tremble and called it an earthquake, never knowing it was the convulsion of a bound god. He would scream then, a sound that was less agony and more pure, undiluted rage, and in the echoing silence that followed as Sigyn scrambled back with the empty bowl, he would laugh. The sound was jagged, echoing off the wet stone. It was not the laughter of a broken prisoner, but of a player who knows the final move is his. He knew what the gods, in their furious punishment, had forgotten. They had chained him to the world's fate. The same roots that held the cave would shake on the last day. The same mountains that were his prison would crumble. His bonds, made of his son, would rot as all things of flesh and time must rot. Every drop of venom was a clock tick. Every tremor he caused was a rehearsal. He was not enduring time, he was counting it down. The gods had thought to make him suffer through Ragnarok's approach. Instead, they had given him a front-row seat to his own victory. His laughter was the sound of his patience, and in Midgard, far below the cave and the mountain and the roots of the world, patience was running out. The farmer's name was Egil. He woke to a silence so complete it felt like a blow. No wind in the pines, no drip of meltwater from the eaves. He pushed open his door and the cold stole the breath from his lungs. His farm, his barley fields, the path to the river, all of it lay buried under a seamless 3-foot blanket of snow. This was not a storm. It was an entombment. The sky was a flat, iron gray. The sun a pale, cold coin that gave no warmth. He knew, in the way a man knows the taste of his own blood, that this snow would not melt. Not tomorrow. Not next season. This was the first morning of Fimbulwinter, the great winter. It would last for 3 years. The world hardened. Rivers turned to stone. Lakes became sheets of black glass. The fish died, then floated, frozen beneath the surface. In the forests, the deer grew thin, their ribs like the struts of a collapsing roof, before they simply lay down in the snow and did not get up. The grain in the storehouses, carefully saved, was measured out in handfuls that grew smaller each week. Then it was gone. The hunger that followed was a quiet, hollowing thing. It was not the dramatic gnawing of a missed meal, but a deep, cold vacancy that settled into the bones. Children stopped crying because crying took energy they did not have. Communities that had shared for generations began to eye their own with a desperate, furtive calculation. In Asgard, the gods watched from the high walls. They saw the white shroud creep across Midgard, snuffing out the green. They saw the hearth fires one by one go dark. Heimdall, whose hearing could detect the growth of grass, now heard only the creak of ice and the fading beat of starving hearts. They could do nothing. This was not a monster to fight, not a giant to duel. This was prophecy in motion, the first irreversible step. To intervene would be to deny the tapestry the Norns had already woven. Their knowledge was a curse sharper than any blade. They saw the catastrophe unfolding in real time, knew every coming death, and were powerless to alter its course. It was the helplessness of watching a news report of a distant flood or fire, the tragedy pixelated on a screen. Knowing your own safety is just an accident of geography and that the world is breaking somewhere beyond your reach. Egil's wife died first, then his eldest son. He buried them in the frozen earth, which was like trying to dig in stone. He stood over the mounds, his own breath crystallizing in the air, and he did not pray. The gods had gone silent. The long, starving dusk of the world had begun, and all anyone could do was wait for the wolves at the edge of the wood to grow bold enough to come closer. High above the frozen world, on the rainbow bridge of the Bifrost, Heimdall stood watch. The stars, usually a constant, familiar tapestry, were blinking out, one by one, not hidden by cloud, but extinguished, as if a great hand were snuffing candles. He felt the vibration through the soles of his feet first, a slow tectonic drumbeat from the east, from Jotunheim. The frost giants were on the march. He lifted the horn, Gjallarhorn. The bone was so cold it burned his lips. His breath fogged the silent air. He did not blow. The prophecy was specific. He would sound the alarm at the precise moment the giant's vanguard touched the shores of Midgard. Not a second before. His was the duty of the perfect witness, the night watchman making his rounds in the cosmos, checking the locks on creation, knowing the break-in was inevitable but bound by fate to wait for the exact scrape of the crowbar. Below, the 3-year winter had done its work. Midgard was a corpse, white and still. The giant's march would be unimpeded. Heimdall's hearing, which could once hear wool growing on a sheep, now tracked only their relentless, crushing footsteps. He counted them. He matched each footfall to a name from the prophecy he had heard whispered at the Well of Urd. He knew which one would be his to fight. And so he waited, a golden sentinel against the dying stars, the horn's mouth poised. The tension was not in the action, but in the restraint. The entire weight of the 9 worlds hung on his patience, on the measured space between one heartbeat and the next. He would let them get close. He would let them believe for one final fatal moment that they had achieved surprise. The vibration through the Bifrost became a tremor, then a shudder. The giant's vanguard touched the shore of Midgard. Heimdall filled his lungs with the last clean air of the old world and blew. The sound of Gjallarhorn was not a note, but a fracture. It cracked the ice over frozen rivers in Niflheim. It shook dust from the rafters in Valhalla. On the plain of Vigrid, 100 miles long and 100 miles wide, the last grains of sand settled into place. The battlefield was ready. In Valhalla, the silence ended. Every Einherjar, every fallen warrior who had feasted and fought for centuries knowing this day would come, stood as one. They did not cheer. They picked up their swords, their axes, their spears, weapons worn smooth from daily battle. They filed out not as a riotous horde, but as an army walking to a muster they had rehearsed in their bones. Odin was already at the gates, astride Sleipnir. The 8-legged horse stamped, each hoof striking a different, discordant note against the stone. Odin's one eye was not on his magnificent army. It was fixed on the eastern horizon, where the sky was beginning to bleed a sickly greenish-gray. They rode out across the Bifrost, and as the last hoof left the rainbow bridge, it shattered behind them. No retreat. The road to the future was gone. On Vigrid, the armies assembled with a terrible, silent precision. The Aesir and Vanir formed their ranks beside the endless columns of the Einherjar. Opposite, from the east, the frost giants lumbered into position, their breath a new ice storm. From the south came the fire giants of Muspelheim, led by Surt, his sword already brighter than the sun. The air itself warred, searing heat meeting, killing cold, creating screaming gales. Then the chains broke. On the island of Lyngvi, the fetter Gleipnir, woven from a cat's footfall and a fish's breath, snapped like rotten thread. Fenrir shook himself, and the mountains of the island crumbled to dust. He threw back his head and howled, and the sound was the death of hope. He ran, and with each stride he grew, until his shoulders scraped the sky. He opened his jaws, and they spanned the horizon. He leapt, and his shadow swallowed the world. He devoured the sun, not obscured it, consumed it. The light vanished, replaced by the dull glowing embers of Surt's sword and the cold dead gleam of the vanished stars. It was the moment in a contest when you see the other side is stronger, better prepared, and you know with a cold sinking certainty that you will lose. The Norse called that moment Ragnarok, and they were right. Odin spurred Sleipnir forward, his spear Gungnir aimed at the heart of the advancing shadow. He rode not with a battle cry, but with a grim, silent acceptance. He knew the name of the beast. He knew the prophecy. He knew his part. Fenrir saw him coming, this one-eyed god who had orchestrated his binding. The wolf's maw, vast as a cavern, descended. Odin fell first. The All-Father, the seeker of wisdom, the king of the gods, was gone, swallowed whole. Just as the Norns had whispered at the Well of Erd, the line of the prophecy was checked off. The battle, the long-doomed battle, was truly begun, and from the roiling sea the great serpent Jormungandr began to haul its world-encircling coil onto the land, its venom already boiling the oceans, seeking the one god it was destined to kill. From the roiling, poisoned sea, the Midgard serpent rose. Jormungandr's head breached the waves like a mountain range being born, each scale a slick, dark shield the size of a longship. Its body, which had encircled the world and bitten its own tail, now uncoiled for the first time, hauling leagues of serpent flesh onto the plain of Vigrid. Where it touched, the ground did not just crater. It dissolved, eaten away by the venom that dripped from its fangs and seeped from its scales. The sea behind it boiled, a vast, hissing cauldron. And Thor was already moving. The god of thunder did not wait. He waded into the seething surf, the water burning his legs, the fumes scorching his lungs. This was the duel written in the stars since the day he had tried to lift the serpent in the hall of the giant Utgarda-Loki. He raised Mjolnir, the forge-hot head of the hammer trailing steam in the toxic air. He did not roar a challenge, he saved his breath for the killing blow. Jormungandr struck. Its maw opened, a cavern lined with fountains of venom. Thor swung. The impact was not a clap of thunder. It was the sound of the world's spine cracking. Mjolnir connected with the crown of the serpent's skull. The enchanted Uru metal, forged and reforged 100 times for this moment, did not bounce. It sank. A web of fractures radiated out from the point of impact, splitting scale, bone, and brain. The serpent's death thrash was a cataclysm, its colossal body whipped across the plain, crushing giants and Einherjar alike, flattening what remained of the landscape into a poisoned marsh. But its head did not rise again. Jormungandr, the world encircler, was dead. Thor stood waist-deep in the boiling sea, the fumes now thick in his chest. He took a step back. Then another. The prophecy stated he would take 9 steps. He was a god fulfilling a script written at the root of the world. 7, 8. The strength that had lifted the serpent that had slain countless giants was gone, spent in that one perfect strike. It's the feeling of pushing through the last mile of a marathon when every muscle is screaming, of finishing the critical task while fever burns through you. The collapse comes not during the effort, but the second after, when the purpose is gone. On the 9th step, Thor faltered. The great heart, which had drummed the rhythm of storms, stuttered. The venom had done its work. He fell backward, Mjolnir slipping from his grip, disappearing beneath the seething acidic waves. He was dead before he hit the water. The silence that followed was brief, broken only by the hiss of poison on water. Then the massive corpse of Jormungandr began to sink, dragging itself down into the deeps by its own weight. The sea did not calm. It churned, a permanent toxic brew, the serpent's final venom leaching into the very waters of the world. The sky, already sunless, now mirrored the poisoned sea, a sickly, swirling green. On the plain, the battle raged on, but the central pillars of the world were falling. Odin was gone. Thor was gone, the sun was gone, the sea was death, and from the south the fire drew nearer, and the shadow of the wolf, still hungry, turned from the place of Odin's fall to seek the rest of the gods. From the south, the horizon itself began to bleed. It was not the green-black of the poisoned sky, but a deep, arterial crimson. The source was Surtur, the fire giant from Muspelheim, and his advance was not a march, but a transformation. Where his foot fell, the very stone of the plain of Vigrid did not burn. It became fire. He carried a sword that was not forged in any hearth. It was a piece of the primordial sun, and its light was a physical heat that peeled the world apart. He walked toward the world tree. Yggdrasil's great roots, which anchored the 9 realms, were already straining from the death throes of Jormungandr. As Surt drew near, the bark did not char. It ignited from the inside, as if the tree's own sap had been waiting for this spark. The flames raced up the trunk, a pillar of fire so immense it could be seen from every realm. Asgard's golden spires, already dark, were painted in flickering orange. The roots in Niflheim, where the well of Jergelmir bubbled, burst like overfilled vessels, flooding the underworld with scalding water. This was the final, consuming truth the Norns had whispered. It is the feeling of watching a wildfire crest the ridge toward your home, knowing the water is gone and the wind is at its back. The certain, awful clarity that nothing will be saved. The gods had known. They had fought anyway. Surtur raised his sword. He did not swing at the remaining Aesir. He plunged it into the base of Yggdrasil, into the heart of the world. The sound was the end of sound, a deep tectonic groan as the central pillar of creation gave way. The realms began to fall. Asgard, Vanaheim, Alfheim, they did not crumble. They unraveled, their substance feeding the all-consuming fire. The great tree which had held everything apart and together was now a conduit for the blaze. The fire spread across the branches to Midgard, to Jotunheim, to Svartalfheim. It leaped the void to Nidavellir. It poured down into hell itself. On the plain, the last combats ceased. God and giant alike turned as one, their eternal war forgotten in the face of the final impartial enemy. The last thing any of them saw was not each other but the fire. It washed over them, a golden-red tide. It consumed the corpse of Fenrir, the body of Thor, the broken shield wall of the Einherjar, the triumphant giants. It burned away distinction, history, and memory. The world did not go dark. It went bright, then white, then nothing. The fire burned itself out, not with a whimper, but with a final exhausted sigh. The silence that followed was not the silence of death, but of absence. The kind of quiet that settles over a field after a terrible storm, when you go outside to find the trees shattered but the air clean, and green shoots already pushing through the mud. A new morning came, not announced by a sun that was gone, but by a single, surviving star piercing a sky of thinning ash. Its light fell on a sea grown preternaturally calm, its surface a perfect mirror, holding the star's reflection like a jewel in a bowl of dark glass. On a beach of warm gray ash, something stirred. A man and a woman, their names long forgotten even to themselves, woke. They were not gods nor heroes. They were Life and Lifdrasir, life and eager for life, who had hidden deep within the wood of Yggdrasil, a world tree that was now only memory and charcoal beneath them. They coughed, stood on trembling legs, and saw what was left. An empty world. The mountains were lower, their peaks sheared off. The plains were vast fields of blackened stone, but as they walked, their feet sinking into the soft ash, they saw it, a blade of grass, defiantly green, piercing the crust, then another, a trickle of clean water, not from any spring they could see, welling up between 2 rocks. The earth itself was healing, and it was doing so with a speed that felt like forgiveness. They found Surtur's sword, now just a twisted, blackened shard of metal, cold to the touch. They passed the immense, bleached rib cage of a wolf, half buried in a dune. They did not know the stories these ruins held to them. It was simply the world. It was all there was, and it was enough. They had the morning, the quiet sea, and the unspoken understanding between them that their first task was not to rebuild a past they never knew, but to name this new green silence. The world had ended. This was the morning after. The forest grew around them, not the deep mythic woods of old, but a new sun-dappled grove where the trees seemed to listen. At midday, their children played by a stream that chattered over smooth, dark stones. One child held up a find, a hammer-shaped stone, water-worn and heavy in his small hand. It was not Mjolnir. That weapon lay at the bottom of a poisoned sea, along with the god who wielded it. But the shape was unmistakable. Life watched them, then looked at Lifthrasir. They had no heirlooms, no photographs. Their entire inheritance was this: a world scrubbed clean of stories, and the single burdensome truth whispered to them by the wind in the ashes. They knew the ending. That evening, as the new stars, brighter and more numerous now, pierced the violet sky, the children asked about the stone. So Lif and Lifthrasir told them, not as a myth, but as a family history. They spoke of uncles they never met, a one-eyed grandfather who traded his eye for wisdom and still walked into the wolf's jaws, a red-bearded uncle who fought a serpent in a poisoned ocean, knowing he would drown in the victory. They spoke of a battle where everyone knew they would lose, and fought anyway. The children listened, their faces solemn in the firelight, fingers tracing the hammerstone's contours. It was not a weapon, it was a memory given weight and shape, and in the telling, the old world's final, defiant act was no longer an ending buried in ash, but a seed planted firmly in the new. The new sun rose over a world without gods. It was a different sun, colder, clearer, its light falling on a landscape of raw potential. The word Ragnarok did not mean just the doom of the gods in the old tongue. It meant the final destiny, and destiny to the Norse was not a dead end. It was a turning of the wheel, the way a forest needs an occasional fire to clear the deadwood and allow new trees to grow. This was destruction understood as the first step of renewal. This was the most honest apocalypse ever imagined. The Norse didn't hope for a savior to swoop down and stop it. They didn't believe in a last-minute pardon. They believed in cycles, in the terrible necessary math where the old must fall to make space for the new. Their gods knew the date of their own deaths and met them on the battlefield anyway. That was the lesson they left in the ashes for Life and Lifthrasir. Courage is not the absence of fear, but the decision to act in spite of it. The stories told by the fire that night became the bedrock of the new age. The hammerstone was placed on a shelf of honor, a silent teacher. The children grew, and they told their own children of the uncles who fought the serpent and the grandfather who faced the wolf. With each telling, the old world's final defiant act was no longer a tragedy buried in ash. It was the fertile ground from which everything after was allowed to grow. The world had ended. And then, as it always must, it began again.